I'm now joined by Royal Lund Group Fund Manager Andrea Williams. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to first of all talk about this succession because it's been a long time in the making. We've been waiting to have an announcement for 2 years.
Yes.
Co-CEOs, having two of them, does it not make the decision process much more difficult?
No, I think it's, they've worked together before, they've worked together for a while. So as long as they're clear in terms of what their specific roles are, and I think Jain is very much on strategy, successfully led the investment bank in the past, and Juergen will be the German speaking and taking care of the regulatory issue and the politicians. So as long as they're clear on their terms of reference, as it were, having worked before, I think it should work well.
And you're happy with who they've
Yes.
chosen? Because Jozef Ackermann is really someone to reckon with. I mean,
Yes, he is, yes.
He's also been seen as one of the faces, one of the reliable faces of European banking.
Yes, yeah, but I think Anshu Jain has done well on the investment banking side. It's about 80% of Deutsche Bank's profits. The challenge for him now is obviously to keep growing that well, defending the market position, integrating Deutsche Postbank, and bringing that forward and increasing the market share in the retail environment. Ackermann will be on the supervisory board, so I think he'll continue in some role.
And again, Anshu Jain was at some point tipped to be the sole CEO, but his German lessons weren't up to scratch. I mean, he's been taking them for many years. Do you think that's the reason? Is that not worrying?
I think there's an element of that, but also I feel that it's a very much a sort of, it's a role that needs somebody to engage with the regulators, engage with the politicians. You know, it is Germany's leading bank. You have to have that, and therefore I think this relationship will work well. Yeah.
In terms of now, you actually own some Deutsche Bank shares.
Yes, I do, yeah.
Are you going to buy some more on the back of this announcement?
Well, I was quite happy with I mean, I think that the banking sector has obviously been more overshadowed. I mean, obviously we had the uncertainty of the announcement, but we've had the Basel III regulation, the SIFI regulations, you know, the stress tests, and now the numbers. There's been a lot of issues, but I think the numbers today were actually quite good if we contrast them, say, to UBS. So on a relative basis, I think the positioning is Deutsche preferred to UBS at the moment, yes.
UBS, and what about Credit Suisse? Because we've also, of course, had this round of stress tests where we're a little bit better than last year, a little bit more credible, but yet didn't go far enough. What do you want to be seen in the European banking sector?
I think the thing is that the stress tests obviously didn't stress for the default, but we now know the details in terms of we've got more disclosure in what they've got on the books. So we as investors can do our own assumptions and say, okay, let's assume a default risk of this on this in Spain and Italy, and then see who needs capital and who may be a bit short. The problem with the Swiss is, although they have the very strong private banking arm, the regulator has burdened them with very high capital requirements.
Which makes them safer, though.
Which makes them safer in some respects, but makes competitive conditions quite difficult. And that, I think, has come through in the UBS numbers. They're beginning now to say more that, okay, where can we actually make decent returns when we have to hold that high level of capital? Which businesses are we subscaling? And that's led to the restructuring. I mean, I know the market conditions are difficult, which is part of it, but I think they're really examining the structure of their business and where they feel they can be going forward. And they were late into certain markets, and that's maybe now catching up with them. So I think there's a sort of distinction going on between the Swiss that have got the safer bit but have got a very strong private banking side, Deutsche Bank that hasn't really got that strong private banking side but has gained market share in the IB and has now got the challenge of going forward and growing the post-bank integration.
What is the biggest challenge actually for banks at the moment? If we leave regulation to one side, and I guess fixed income, which has been taking a beating in a lot of these banks, investment bank, have they overhired? Are there now too many bankers that they have to pay without many returns?
There's two sort of separate things, isn't there? There's the IB that have got to cope with more regulation, an inflated cost base, a revenue pool that's contracting, and on plain equities, cash equities, capacity never seems to leave the industry. You've always got a lot of startups. So there's that issue. There's the hedge fund industry, maybe there's less trading going on. They've got to cope with that. They've got to cut the cost base. And then you've got the retail banks, which are facing a different challenge, where there's the whole issue of the access to funding and what they're paying for that funding. So the Spanish and the Italians are obviously having to pay more for the funding because of what's happening to their bonds.
And because of the peripheral countries.
Because of the peripheral. And then you've got the Scandis, who are seeing good loan growth, no problems with funding, good access to funding, and provisions still declining.
So would you buy any shares in some of the peripheral countries? I mean, they look pretty cheap.
We do own some of them, but the problem is that you've got there's two issues going on. You've got the Spanish situation. I think the Greeks are uninvestable. Let's leave them to one side. The Spanish, you've got the problem of cost of funding, bonds conditions. Yes, okay, they've got that nice Latin American exposure, but the problem is domestically, you've still got NPLs going up. and you've still got the property issue and the the residential mortgage, so that's all under pressure still.
Yes, definitely under a lot of pressure. Andrea, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Andrea Williams there.